broadcast, and then we will. Hello, welcome to the Zehut Economics webinar with Gilad Alper, our economist for Zehut. Gilad was responsible for writing the vast portion of Zehut's economic reform policy that is part of our vast platform. Gilad, as I mentioned, is an economist. He has working for he's a member of the advisory board of Israel's Ministry of Finance. The Ministry of Finance trusts what Gilad has to say. He's also the head of foreign equity research for a large Israeli investment bank, and he's worked for security companies in London and in Merrill Lynch in New York. Gilad is also, like many Israelis, is the co-founder of a technology startup in the startup country. Gilad obviously has all different kinds of economics degrees, but I mentioned Gilad is one of the major contributors to our economic reform policy. To begin the evening, Gilad sent out to all of you a copy of the slides he'll be using for tonight's webinar. If you didn't get it, you can probably download it right now from your GoToWebinar panel, and maybe on the right side of your screen, there's a little section called Handouts, and there's a little part there called Zehut Capitalism, and you should be able to download that file if you'd like to. We will also send it out after the webinar is complete. In addition to that, we'll be sending out a copy of a replay of the webinar to everyone who registered, even if you are not with us at this time. Just before Gilad starts, I'd like to also thank Jeff Cohen from the US, who's on the line with us tonight. He's helping us in the engineering labs back here. And just so we can see who's with us tonight, I'd like to ask you all to please send in a little message right now to on your chat board and tell us your first name and where you're coming from. If you're in Israel, let us know what city you're in, or if you're in a different country, please let us know what country you are in. You see your chat board, it might be called questions. Great, I see someone from Switzerland. Max, I'm probably pronouncing your name wrong. Richard from the USA. You can all hear okay? Fantastic. Shmuel Sackett, the chairman of Zehut International, is here from Herzliya. Zev from Santa Fe, New Mexico. Chaim Steve from Efrat. Jonathan from Brooklyn. Ilana from Canada. Wow. Rafi from Katzrin. Philip from the Yishuv of Dolev in Israel. Fantastic. Thank you all for coming. There's more people who are here now. Gilad, I think we're ready to go to you. I'm very pleased to welcome Gilad Alper to host tonight's webinar.
Hi everyone. Welcome to the webinar. I'll start with the presentation in just a second. I just wanted to thank you all for taking the time to hear our ideas on how we can improve the economic well-being of Israelis. There's no magic wand. There are many challenges to deal with, and I'll mention some of them during the next hour. But all in all, I think that if we implement some much-needed reforms, Israel could become one of the richest countries in the world, something I'm sure we all want. So let me just jump immediately to the presentation. This slide, I think, is a very good way to get an overall glimpse, perspective on how Israel looks like. This is basically a ranking of the most economically free countries in the world based on data from a Canadian think tank called Fraser Institute. And here you can see Israel is right there on the right-hand side of the chart, which is not where you want Israel to be. We obviously want Israel to be on the left-hand side. It's about 45 or so in the ranking of free economies, economies that are being measured by the freedom of trade, the size of government, protection of property rights, and so on. And I think that if you want to put the overall objective of Zehut in terms of this chart is simply to take Israel and move it as close as possible to the left-hand side of the chart, where you can see countries like Canada, Switzerland, New Zealand. That's where we want to be. Unfortunately, that's not where we are right now. The next slide, I think, is very important. This is a slide that shows the burden of regulations based on data from the World Bank, Fraser Institute, and some other stuff. And here on the left-hand side, you can see countries with a light burden of regulation. On the right-hand side, right at the end, is Israel. And the reason you can't read the names of the countries at the bottom of the chart is not because I was negligent in preparing the chart. It's just because there are so many countries in the world that have less regulations than Israel. In fact, every country that's half normal or, well, obviously normal in the world has less regulations than Israel, and that's having huge implications. We'll talk about that in the future, in the next hour. But this is just, I think, a pretty depressing picture of where we are right now in terms of regulations. This chart here basically shows the same thing, regulatory burden, but focusing on the real estate sector, basically how long it takes to get a construction permit, how many phases one needs to go through to get the permit. And here also Israel in a very bad state. The real estate sector in Israel is known to be very problematic. I guess we'll speak about that as well. But the mere fact that it takes so much time to receive a permit, the bureaucracy, the regulation is so horrible in Israel, that's a big part of why the economy isn't doing as well as it could have. And then this slide, I know some of you don't read Hebrew, but don't be alarmed. It's very easy. Basically, we have some lines going up, some lines going down, and it shows the prices. So lines that are going up, obviously prices are trending up since 2000 until 2014. Lines that are coming down, that are prices that are trading down from 2000 and 2014. And some of the prices that go up are food, some telecommunications, some other stuff. Prices that are going down is clothing, footwear. And remember those sectors, clothing and footwear, furniture, some other home equipment coming down, and then food coming up, because the next slide really explains it. Next slide, also in Hebrew, and it shows basically the portion of consumption that comes from imports. So the red line at the bottom, that's food, where the portion of imports is very, very low, which is why prices are trending up in Israel. And the reason is that the government is imposing very heavy tariffs and other limitations on trade, which basically makes imports of food to Israel very expensive, sometimes impossible, protects local producers from competition, and thereby forcing everyone in Israel to pay very dearly for food. And then, for instance, the green line, that's footwear, where the portion of imports is coming up. And if you remember from the previous chart, this is where prices are coming down. So there's a very clear correlation. Where you have imports, where the tariffs are low, prices are coming down, the cost of living is coming down, the selection is getting richer, the standard of living is coming up. Where imports are being limited or constrained by government, tariffs are high and so on, prices are high, selection is poor. It's very obvious. And of course, this is one of the reasons, or maybe the main reason, why we in Zehut, one of our main goals is to basically abolish all tariffs, all limitations on trade, and basically take Israel slowly and gradually, but take Israel into basically a free trade region. And this is the last slide before we open to Q&A. This slide is extremely, oh, sorry, again, it's in Hebrew. But those slides are from the Bank of Israel. They don't exist in English. That's why they're in Hebrew. But this is basically productivity, right? This is basically how much output and the average Israeli produces per hour. So Israel is here marked in gray. As you can see, we're pretty low. The OECD is marked in red, doing much better than Israel in terms of the dollars produced per hour. All the way to the left are the countries that really enjoy very high productivity, like Denmark, Holland, Belgium, the United States, Norway. We have Switzerland, Sweden, some other countries. This is maybe the best summary of how relatively poorly Israel is doing, because when we don't produce a lot of output per hour, we don't earn a lot of money, wages are low, and we need to work very long hours. And in Israel, we do work very long hours to produce an overall GDP or income than other countries can do working less hours. So basically, I mean, this is another way to summarize what Zehut actually wants. We want to implement the economic reforms needed to get Israel as close as possible to the left-hand side of the chart, where we won't have to work long hours and still be relatively wealthy. This is my summary, or this is my very short presentation. And Ari, I think we can open to Q&A.
Yes, we can definitely open the Q&A. I just want to point out that anyone who accuses Zehut of being a right party can see from this side that sometimes, from this slide, that sometimes we actually want to be on the left. Okay, if anyone has questions about what they've heard from Gilad or other economic issues that you are familiar with that might be important to the Jewish state, please do write them in, and we'll try to give you an opportunity to we'll either ask those questions for you, or if we can, we might be able to actually get you on the line.
Aryeh, I'm going to jump in. This is Jeff Cohen.
Sure. Yeah.
Gilad, can you give us a good example for all of our listeners of the overregulation that we experience in Israel, somewhere where we can get rid of regulations that will make things much, much easier?
Examples. I'll use two examples that look a little bit weird and maybe not very crucial to the overall economy, but they're very indicative of the environment overall. We have a member of Zehut that wanted to open up a business of selling, producing and selling honey. And as he was establishing his business, a small business, it was basically almost a hobby for him, it turned out that it's forbidden to transport more than 8 kilos of honey in your car, which of course doesn't make any sense, right? Honey is not flammable as far as I know. It doesn't explode. It's very clear that the only reason this regulation exists is to protect local or existing big producers from small entrepreneurs, small businesses, to prevent those small businesses from competing with them by inventing really nonsensical regulations. Another example, again, it sounds small, but again, it's very indicative. Bakeries in Israel. Apparently, bakeries in Israel are considered a food factory. And as a food factory, they need to be at least 200 square meters big. I don't know what it is in American metrics, but it's kind of big. They need to include showers for employees. They have very special limitations on exactly what they can do in this bakery. And the result is that the only good bakeries in Israel that exist are part of big chains, or are very old bakeries that still operate based on old permits. So we have very few new bakeries that open up in Israel. And everyone that spends some time outside of Israel, which is now everyone, I mean, everyone is traveling abroad, knows that bakeries in Israel are pretty dull compared to what you can find in Europe and the US. Again, a small example, but I think it's indicative. I have more, but maybe you want to move to the next question, Arya.
Yes, I'd actually like to do that. I'm very excited that the questioner on the next question, Rafi Farber, is very well steeped in economics. And in addition to that, and here is a bonus for everyone on this call, Rafi is our first Zehut International candidate for the Knesset. He is the first person who has registered to be a candidate in Zehut International's candidate list. Gilad himself is a candidate in the Israeli list, but Rafi, now you will have the first time to hear him, and he would like to ask you a question also. Go ahead, Rafi.
Okay, hi Gilad. Can everybody hear me?
Hi.
Hi, okay. So my question is sort of a cross between politics and economic policy. I'm with you on repealing regulations, whatever we can, however we can. My question is, how are we possibly going to do this without leading the country? What I'm worried about, and I'll tell you what I'm worried about, how politics works in the Knesset, I understand that we try to get something passed. Let's say we want to get rid of the honey regulation or whatever it is that we want to do. and then some other party says, okay, if you want us to help you repeal that regulation, you have to support us on XYZ, and let's say XYZ that they want is not good. So the only way we'd be able to pass these repealing of regulations, which we need to do, is by making dirty political deals. And I don't want to do that. So what can we do to stop that?
Yeah, good question. Look, let me start by saying that in Israel, for example, right now, the Minister of Finance is someone who leads a party of his own, and he has only is not a good word here, I guess, but he's got only 10 mandates. So with 10 mandates, which is out of 120 in Parliament or in Knesset, you can become Minister of Finance. So you don't have to be extremely politically powerful in the political system in Israel to win, influential positions when it comes to the economy. Now, in terms of the how do you pass regulations, or how do you do anything when you don't have, 40 or 50 or 60 seats in Parliament, which we're not going to have in the next elections for sure. And I guess there's no escape having to make deals. There's no escape from negotiating. There's no escape from working with other party. What I would say is that I'm not sure that's the problem. I think the problem lies in two different areas. Firstly is that usually when you try to change anything, you work against vested interests, right? If you take the honey as an example, this regulation is not there for, by coincidence. It's there because the producers lobbied the politicians to pass that regulation, and they're going to fight against repealing it. So the big advantage, or one of the big advantages someone like Zehut has, I think, is that we don't have any commitments to anyone. We don't have something like the Merkaz Likud in Hebrew, which is really the center of the Likud party, which is mostly occupied by interest groups like taxi drivers and other people that try to stop all type of reforms in Israel because it always works against their own interests. We don't have that. We're a completely new party, right? We basically are being driven by, or being helped by social media more than anything else. We're pretty much ignored by the mainstream media in Israel. So us not having those interests or connections or commitments or connections to vested interests and interest groups, that's the big advantage we have. But there's no escape us having to do deals. I guess the only thing I can say more straight to that point is that we will only do deals that are beneficial to the Israeli economy. If it's not beneficial to the Israeli economy, then what's the point, right? There's no point in repealing one regulation and then getting two new damaging regulations instead as part of the deal. So it comes to what it is that we can do politically. Obviously, it has to do with how many seats we're going to get. But there's no. I don't think there's any better textbook answer to that.
Great, thank you very much, Raf, your question brings up something that I'd like to ask of Gilad, and you're an economist. What made you decide to get into politics?
Well, because I'm a liberal, right? I believe in freedom, both economically and social freedom. I see it very clearly that every country in the world that is economically free is doing very well. Every country that is not is doing badly. There's absolutely no exception to that rule. No single exception, nothing, at least, in the long term. And Zehut is the only party that, it's the only liberal party in Israel. And the thing is that Israel is a huge lost opportunity because, despite all of the government we have here, central planning, regulations, all of the bad stuff government is doing here, still economically, we're not leading the Western world by no stretch of the imagination, but we're not doing very badly. And I just imagine how well we can do if we actually free up the market in Israel, free up the economy, become more liberal, dismantle some of the government controls we have in Israel. We can be an extremely, extremely rich country. And it's frustrating that we are not getting there, I think, because we don't have a single liberal party in Israel. We haven't had one for 40 or 50 years, I reckon, which makes Zehut very interesting, and for me, a very interesting, opportunity or venue to make an impact.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'd like to call now on Chaim Tzvi, who has a question for you.
Hi, Gilad. This is Chaim Tzvi here. I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time to give the presentation. One of the things that we know that in the Israeli economy there's a large monopoly control on many industries. How are we as a party going to be able to break up that hold of those few companies in order to increase the competition?
Yes. So I take one example, which is particularly vexing, I think, which is the cement monopoly. We have a cement monopoly in Israel called Nesher, which means eagle. I don't know what's the connection, but it means eagle. And it's a monopoly. It's protected by the state. The state is using tariffs and some other old regulations to prevent cheaper imports of cement into Israel. And it's not bad enough, all of the regulations in the real estate sector, and the fact that the state controls all the land, almost all of the land, so prices are so high. They're kind of, adding to the pain by artificially increasing the price of cement in Israel. So what we can do as a party to solve that problem, it's actually technically extremely simple, right? You abolish the regulation, you abolish the tariff, you repeal all type of limitations and tariffs that have to do with the cement, and immediately the price of cement will come down. Now, the real question is, what I'm saying now is not a secret. Just Google in Hebrew, Nesher and monopoly or eagle monopoly, and you can get 1,000 hits. So everyone knows it. Again, the point is that we don't have any vested interests. We don't have anyone telling us what to do. We don't have lobbyists, well, partly, I guess, to be honest, because we're a completely new party, right? But we don't have any commitments. We don't, as far as I know, have any one of those big businesses or big corporations in the party active in any way. We're going to do stuff that is completely in the interest of, the people overall. It's, again, technically, it's very, very simple. It's just that you need to be aware of the economics and not be, beholden to any special interests.
Okay, very good. We've got a couple questions here. Shmuel Sackett wants to know, nothing makes me crazier than the fact that Osem soup nuts, which are made right here in Petah Tikva, are sold for less money in New York than they sell for in Israel. Why is that?
Sorry, what is being sold cheaper in New York than in Israel?
Osem soup nuts, shkedei marak.
Oh. Yes, actually, we have a few examples. Some other fruits and vegetables are being sold, being exported from Israel abroad and are sold cheaper abroad than in Israel, and that's only half of the problem. Because usually the higher quality produce is going outside, and we get stuck with the less quality food in Israel. It's applicable to a variety of foods in Israel. And look, if you look at some of the numbers, some of the tariffs that are being imposed on the fruits and vegetables and cheeses and meats, it's amazing. It's like 300% tariff on onion, 150% tariff on poultry, I think, some other crazy tariff on beef, and the reason, of course, is to protect the agriculture sector in Israel from outside competition. And I mean, this is one of the most sensitive points when you speak about imports, because agriculture has like an aura of something that we need to protect, either because Israel needs food security, or for some other reasons. We can go over all of them right now, but none of them make sense. The market needs to be opened up completely, just like New Zealand did in the 80s of the previous century. And also, by the way, it's not only that the market or the local producers are being protected from imports, the local market itself is completely managed and supervised and centrally planned by the state. For example, farmers need to sell their goods using special marketing councils and stuff like that, all of them created by the state. None of them make sense in a free economy, and we need to dismantle all of them. The market needs to be freed up completely. And by the way, I'm sure that what's going to happen in Israel to the agriculture sector is that the sector isn't going, when we actually open it up to competition, is that the sector isn't going to go away. Israelis are very smart and very ingenious and entrepreneurial in many things, and I'm sure that some parts of the agriculture sector is going to prosper. All of the smarter, faster farmers are going to do well, actually going to do a lot better than they do right now when they, when their advantage versus other farmers is being kind of hidden by the overall protection from imports. So yeah, that problem of us exporting goods overseas that are actually better and cheaper than what we have now, that won't happen if we have enough political power.
That's great. I don't eat soup nuts myself, but I'm happy to hear that.
Gilad, we have about it myself, but whatever.
Great. Just to let you know that one of the people who's joining us on the call tonight is one of our members of Zehut International, is joining us from Pakistan.
From Pakistan?
Yes, which is pretty incredible. She sends her regards and her respect. I'd like to send the next question over to Lior.
Yes. I just wanted to thank Gilad for giving the presentation, even though I missed the presentation because I logged in late. But I just I have a 2-point question, which is on the topic of tax reform. I just wanted to ask first, what kind of tax reform do you think Israel needs? And second, what do you think Israel should institute a sales tax?
Okay, so the problem with taxes, not only in Israel, but in other countries as well, is that you can't simply go ahead and cut taxes, without thinking about the overall spend or the overall budget of the state, which means we can go in and cut taxes without doing anything else, with regards to how much money the government spends, and the result is going to be a deficit. And that's actually worse than taxes. So what we need to do, or what we can do, and that's actually part of our platform, is that the first stage is to cut corporate taxation in Israel. Corporate taxes in Israel are relatively high compared to other countries of the same size. There is a huge amount of discrimination between tech companies in Israel, which pay very low rates, and other, normal companies that pay higher rates. The statutory rate is 25. And according to our platform, and I think that makes sense, we want to cut the corporate taxation to 18%, not immediately, but gradually to 18%, and see what the impact of that is going to be on the overall tax revenues, right? Because again, you don't want tax revenues to come, under the budget, which is only going to increase the deficit. But the more complicated part with this reform, or with what we want to do with taxes, is that it's just not enough to deal with taxes. We actually have to deal with the budget. And this is where the real battle is going to be, because cutting corporate taxation, Netanyahu wanted to do it back in 2010, 2011. Public opposition wasn't that bad. So, it's possible in terms of, politics and public perception. The problem is, again, the size of the budget. The budget in Israel has grown, on average, approximately 5% every year since 2010. And that's a huge problem. That can't continue. If we have enough political power, if we get to a position where we can do it, I think the first thing we need to do is to simply freeze all budget additions, to simply keep it at the same level for the next year, 2 years, 3 years. In parallel, cut corporate taxation, see what the result is. Can we actually increase the revenue, tax revenues? Because there's a lot of dynamic scoring going on, especially when you cut corporate taxation, and then see what to do next. In theory, if you can control the budget and then also cut corporate taxation, the economic activity can increase. And then with time, we can cut other type of taxation, especially income tax in Israel, which is extremely progressive. The 20% of Israelis that earn the highest wages, which by the way doesn't mean anything, right? 20% highest wages in Israel is actually not a lot of money, but still 20%, they pay something like 90% of the income tax in Israel. And that's unfair, that's extremely progressive, and that needs to be taken down. But again, that can only be taken down after we deal with the budget. Sales tax, we have VAT right now. Do we want to replace it or add it with some other tax? Sales tax obviously has some advantages, at least in theory, over other type of taxation, especially income tax, because it distorts savings less than income tax. But I think that's something far in the distance. For the next few years, if we can deal with the budget and with the corporate tax, that's going to be impressive enough.
If I could just ask one more question.
Sure.
Are you proposing that we should shrink the budget right away, like across the board spending cuts right away, or gradual spending cuts?
So I think that firstly what we can do is simply make sure that we don't have any increase in the budget. You don't have to cut anything at the beginning, partly because we probably won't be able to do it politically, right? We need to be realistic. If you can just make sure that the budget doesn't grow at all for a couple of years, again, that's going to be very impressive, and it's going to be great because that's going to be the first time it happened for years. So it's going to have some positive economic effects. Now, how do you actually if we actually get to the point where we don't just keep it flat, but we actually want to cut the budget, what's the best way to do that? In theory, across the board cuts are what you would consider a pretty simplistic and almost dumb way of doing it, because it makes more sense to cut more where there's more fat, more waste, and where the budget is maybe clearly overinflated. But the fact is that in Israel, almost all of the different items of the budget are very much inflated. I don't remember the numbers exactly, but over the last 5 or 10 years, the budget on education and the welfare and many other items increased by tens of or dozens of percentage points. And the level of service that was actually given by the government, as it is funded by those taxes, hasn't improved at all. So we can, in theory, cut across the board and nothing will happen, because when we increase the budget, nothing happens as well, right? The service the government gives us isn't improving when we're increasing the budget, so it's probably not going to get worse when we actually cut the budget. So in Israel, though I think it's considered less sophisticated to simply cut across the board rather than actually being, more cautious and smarter in how you actually cut the budget. In Israel, you can simply do it across the board, and that's just going to be fine.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lior. Moshe, you're up next.
Okay. Hi, Gilad. I'm Moshe Burt, live in Ramat Beit Shemesh. In your earlier presentation tonight, you indicated that you considered yourself a liberal. Okay, and and I'm asking in the context of alt-left progressivism, as it's known in the United States, Shalom Akshav here in Israel, and the various other non-governmental entities. Okay, what is your definition of liberal? Okay, that's number one. And number two, I think in speaking economically, speaking about the economy, speaking about people's money, I think we can't get by without addressing the whole Oslo fiasco and its impact on Israel's taxpayers, you know, on the Israeli economy. You know, we pay utility bills for the PA, for Hamas, and whether we get reimbursed is problematic. We keep transferring taxes that we collect on their behalf, and we get the short end of the stick every time.
Yeah, the PA is Palestinian Authority, to people that are not familiar with the local terminology. Let me start with your first question. I actually kind of misspoke, or at least I wasn't clear enough. When I'm saying that I'm a liberal, I mean I'm a liberal in the classical sense, the classical European sense, which in the US translates to libertarian, right? That's what I actually mean. So liberal, you know, European, classically European liberal, you know, in the tradition of either Hayek or Mises or Milton Friedman or Adam Smith, whatever, John Locke, all of these guys. So for all of you Americans listening in, you probably need to think about me as a libertarian rather than as a liberal. In Israel, the word liberal is still understood in its original European sense. So it's natural for me to use it here. It also has, honestly, a better ring, a better sound in Hebrew than a libertarian. Libertarian is a little bit awkward in Hebrew. So yeah, liberal, which means that, you know, property rights, I want the country or the state to be out of my pocket, out of my plate, out of my bed, out of my life, part of my own private platform or agenda. Is Zehut candidate is also the separation of church and state, or religion and state, I guess. You know, open communications, legalization of cannabis, other stuff that are, you know, part of the overall liberal way of thinking. To your second question, all of the money we lost over the last, since the early 90s, I guess, that's never coming back. But I can say that with some degree of confidence that the idea of a two-state solution in Israel, I wouldn't call it completely debunked. I think there are probably some proponents that think you know, it's a good idea. But if you look at the pendulum, if you know, let's say in the 70s or in the 80s, the pendulum was completely to the side of absolutely no Palestinian state. Doesn't make sense. It moved almost all, you know, to the other way in the 90s and the 2000s, that yes, a Palestinian state is the solution. Right now, I think the pendulum is swinging to the other side, where a Palestinian state is considered an impractical solution. So I can at least hope that we won't have a second Oslo.
Thank you very much. Abigail, the next question is yours.
Hi, thank you. I want to ask, in terms of the final chart that you presented, what steps can be taken to move Israeli workers into greater productivity and wages and less hours at work? I've been here almost 10 years now, and this is something that right from the start I said, this has to change, and I just don't know how.
Technically, it's extremely simple. Firstly, because you can look at the countries that do enjoy higher productivity than Israel, and the only thing you need to do is to emulate them, right? I mean, that's simple. And all of those countries, or well, most of them that enjoy higher productivity in Israel, also have economies that can be characterized as free economies, which means regulation is lower, the trade, you have a lot of free trade, property rights are being protected better than in Israel, and so on. Now, I can speak only about that subject for a couple of hours, but yeah, Arya is getting, is panicking. So I'll say this, I spoke about trade. Let me just spend a few words talking about the limitations we have on trade or imports in Israel. I spoke about how it impacts the cost of living, right? We have tariffs on imports, so local producers are protected from competition from overseas, so prices are higher and the quality is lower. That's only one side of the problem. The other side of the problem, which arguably could be bigger, is that this is the reason, one of the reasons why productivity in Israel is so low. Because the productivity you see in the chart that I've shown is really an average, right? It's an average of extremely high productivity in the export-oriented sectors, mainly the tech sector, and very low productivity of the local sector or local producers. And the reason that productivity is so low with local producers is that they don't need to compete, because you don't have free imports. And because they don't need to compete, they don't invest in factories, they don't invest in machines, they don't invest in training their employees, and they don't do that because they don't have to, because they don't have serious competition coming from overseas. Now, because they don't invest in the factories and in machines and in training their personnel, the productivity of their people are low, and therefore they pay them lower wages. Because the way you increase wages is by making sure your employees are more productive. If they're more productive, you can pay them higher wages. If they're not productive, you can't pay them higher wages because they're going to lose money. So if you want to, this is one of the reasons that productivity is so important. Not only it allows you to generate a lot of income by not working long hours, it basically means that your wages as an employee are going to be higher. So free trade regulation is a huge issue. Again, because it constrains or it inhibits entrepreneurship, investments. Small businesses can't prosper where they need to deal with so much regulations. I mentioned in previously examples that are a little bit maybe esoteric, but for example, a much better way of explaining it is to say that it's extremely tough in Israel to open a new factory because fire safety demands are such that you need to spend so much money in just getting the certification from the state that you adequately protected against fire that you can't open your business, right? And therefore, the only businesses that continue to exist are existing large businesses that can invest in equipping themselves according to the ridiculous demands of the state. Yeah, so I can speak about it a lot longer, but I'll say this. Low regulations, smarter taxation, free trade, and another thing, I'll finish that answer with that, is that human capital is extremely important for productivity. And this is another place where Israel is doing very badly. Our schools, our government schools are horrible. I mean, everyone who lives in Israel knows that. You have like international scores or tests. I'm not sure what the names are. The name escapes me. But according to the scores, Israel is doing very badly compared to some other Western and Far Eastern country. But you don't need tests to know that. Everyone in Israel knows that government schools are horrible. So this is another thing you need to fix if you want to increase productivity and improve human capital. And that's, by the way, also a part of the Zehut platform, which is the voucher system, or a charter school, I think, as it is called in the US, which in Israel can really do wonders. So yeah, a long answer, but it's a good question.
Okay, thank you. The next caller is from Switzerland. Mats, I believe your name is, or perhaps Matis. Please ask your question.
Thank you. I was wondering about housing. That's a big issue in Israel, and thereby a big issue for all of us. The continuously rising prices making, young couples starting out new homes almost impossible. Is that only a matter of supply in your view, or is there more complex chain of events?
Sorry, you're asking about the real estate prices, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Housing
Okay. So yeah, I'd say the prices in Israel, or real estate prices, are extremely high for three reasons. The first one is that you have Zehut, right? Zero interest rate policy in Israel, just like most other Western countries, and that's distorting the market and making real estate and mortgages affordable, and artificially stimulates the real estate market. That's one reason. That has to do with the Bank of Israel. Let's forget about that for a second. The other two reasons are more relevant to Zehut, and that's I actually showed you. Let me go back to the sharing the screen. Let's see if that works. Can everyone see the screen? Yeah, okay. So this is a chart that shows dealing with construction permits. Right? This is a huge issue in Israel, where bureaucracy and regulation that is involved with building a house or a building or an apartment or a neighborhood in Israel is absolutely atrocious. And I'm talking about it takes in Israel about 15 years to build a new neighborhood. And you have like planning councils and planning committees and endless regulations, and bureaucracy is horrible. And everyone, well, everyone is maybe too strong a word, but many people are paying bribes to get their requests or submissions or applications processed before other people get their own requests processed. It's extremely shady, corrupt. It's a horrible situation. So this is one reason why real estate in Israel is so expensive. And by the way, I'm talking here about just demand and supply, right? And the third reason that has to do with demand and supply is that in Israel, 93% of the land is owned by the state. And in the center of Israel, around Tel Aviv and the Tel Aviv metropolitan, the percentage is lower. It's about 60% that's owned by the state. And the state is being extremely reluctant to sell the land to private developers, to real estate developers, for the ordinary bureaucratic regulatory reasons. The state wants to keep all of the power to itself. Bureaucrats that work for the government want to make sure that they continue to hold to the power that they have. And if they sell that land too quickly and too generously, they lose the power right now. So they do it very, very, very slowly, very gradually. So the state owning land and very tough regulation makes sure that we have an over demand for or excess demand for apartments. That's why prices are high. And part of the Zehut platform is to dismantle most of the regulations and most of the limitations of the regulatory limitations that are currently, stifling the market, and also to sell land in quantities that are going to overshadow everything that's been done in Israel for the last 2 or 3 decades. And this is one of the places we can, I think, in theory, actually do it, because the public is absolutely outraged by the prices of real estate. So if you present with a solution that might look revolutionary, but maybe convincing in that it can be effective in solving the problem, you can actually do it.
So you're saying that, would you agree that doing something about the bureaucracy and this selling of land would be killing many birds with one stone, making ourselves also very popular, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's going to be, look, by the way, I mean, you can ask yourself how come it wasn't done so far. And that's probably going back to the point of, vested interests and people in the ruling bodies of the big parties in Israel are being dominated by people that currently, enjoy the state of things as they are. Because look, I mean, this is a very general opinion or general observation, I guess, about capitalism and liberal markets. Liberalism is fantastic for the citizenry. It's horrible for politicians and bureaucrats. It's horrible for them because let's just stop sharing my screen. It's horrible for politicians and bureaucrats because liberalism basically means that people, basically manage their own lives. The economy is free. There's no reason to bribe anyone. There's no reason to, exchange favors. There's no reason to, you can't buy votes if you have nothing to give in exchange, right? That's why liberalism is so unpopular in most Western countries, because unfortunately politicians, rule those countries, and they don't like giving the people too much power. And this is just another, and I think this is the deep reason why real estate prices, although the solution is so clear, why that solution is not being implemented, because, again, it's bad for the people that now rule the country.
Jeff? Jeff, you here? Hold on, we have a question from Jeff. He may be on mute. Okay. If Jeff doesn't come back on, I think we can wrap up the session tonight, Gilad. I'd like to thank you once again for taking the time to be with us tonight. I'd like to remind everyone that Gilad is a candidate in Zehut's Israeli Knesset list. Today, I was in the headquarters in Zehut office in Tel Aviv, and there was a lot of activity going on as the many candidates were getting their final paperwork in. Things have started to get very exciting here on the political sense scene in Zehut in Israel. We're looking forward to some very interesting times coming up. There's September primaries for Israeli elections, December primaries for the Zehut international elections. Things are going to get very interesting, and who knows when the actual elections will be in the country. Thank you so much, everyone, for Gilad and for Jeff hosting on the other side. It's been a pleasure. Good evening.
Thank you very much, everyone.